see it on Google review and kind of read up on these things and see who's experiencing what. And I mean, you don't want to make a sort of generalization with one experience, but if you see 10, 15, 20 Google reviews that sort of say the same thing, then it could be a red flag in terms of community experience as well.
You as or let's put it yourself into an operator, a developer that actually wants to optimize for community, and they're like, how do we measure community? Neha asked this question here, which was like, is there a matrix which is used by anyone on how to measure community vitality? I really like the term vitality. I know, Matt, you've been working on something like this, and probably Jeevan, you and Rachel, you have like your own criteria for how to measure the vitality of a community. How would you answer that question?
Really tricky thing to do. It's a very nuanced process, but as you were saying, Guy, like we're developing with Conscious Co-Living an impact framework for the co-living sector. So it'll be released, we'll be developing different indicators to measure well-being, sustainability, and community. And this is based on a lot of research and development that we've been doing and a few focus groups that we've been doing. But it's quite a nuanced process. The most important thing I think though is putting these measurement systems in place. To enter a cheesy or cliche quote, like you measure what you treasure. And as an organization, I think that co-living operators do have to measure these things and put this in the heart of their business strategy as key performance indicators, as KPIs, and really look at, like the question said, the community vitality or resident well-being, or how the community is embedded into the local community or impacting the local community economically or culturally. So these kinds of frameworks are a bit tricky to put in place, but it is something that as an organization, I think needs to be prioritized.
And Jeevan, Rachel, do you have any like key KPIs when it comes to like measuring community? Or Rachel, you were about to say something like beforehand.
I was like, when you're like, how do you measure community and how do the success look like? I'm like, the high scores on my surveys is generally my answer. But I think for us, like success is really like the way I define success in terms of my team and what we're doing to make our community happy is my team knowing and me knowing members' names and face. And if we can know every single person in the area that we take care of, then for me that is successful, because it means that we can help connect anyone to anyone who has similar interests to each other. And for me, I define our success is when we know everyone's name to face and we can take care of them in a specialized, tailored way and introduce them to other people.
For me, it's slightly different because, again, my communities are real estate communities where people actually buying their property, jointly owned property, people buying like condos or buying a home in a community that's shared. And therefore, for us, it's all about needs and desires or obligations and expectations. We have representative bodies in each of these communities. Needs and obligations are things you must fulfill. For example, insurance and safety and fire safety systems and so on. Then there are the desires and expectations. They want flowers in their lobbies, like in Burj Khalifa, they want orchids in the reception, and they want a particular fragrance, but it's different for different communities. So we have to look at what our customers expect from us, both from the obligations perspective and from the desires or expectations perspective. And then we constantly deliver that. And at the end of every quarter, we're going back to them and say, okay, did we deliver what we promised you? And on that basis, we know how successful we are and how successful we are not. And it's all, of course, linked to money at the end of the day. How much money are they willing to spend for us to deliver that service to them? We always go back to the owners and say, tell us what you want and how much you're willing to pay for that service.
Great. Love all of your answers, especially because here it's, for example, Jeevan, what you said was, I have this like internal quote that I always apply to my own life, which is happiness equals reality minus expectations. Right. So if you're able to apply, and to apply the expectations that were set on you as a community manager, then you're going to make people happy. And in fact, if you over deliver on reality and people have less expectations than you actually delivered, they're going to be happy. The downfall is when you promise a strong community in your space and like amazing types of connections and you can't deliver on that. That's when it creates frustrations.
Exactly.
Now there's two questions from the audience, from Yasmin and Varishu. Both talked. So Yasmin said, she asked about how to create engagement And it seems like, especially like it would be for like extroverts instead of introverts. And when Rishu asks how to create community, especially with heterogeneous tenants, when they have apparently like young couples, college students, senior citizens, is there a possibility, and if yes, how, to create community with people who are fundamentally different in the way they engage, in the amount of they engage, and in their personal interests and needs?
I think it's like the demographic doesn't necessarily matter. I think people that are bought into community are bought into community, and that kind of defies age. So it's more of like a psychographic that you can have in different co-living communities. Are people can connect on that defies all age, things like nature, things like music, things like food. And those are just like the easiest way to connect people of all ages, of different lifestyles, of different cultures. And there are a few of these kind of essential human needs, as Jivan was saying, or behaviors that are encouraged or facilitated through some kinds of rituals and events that I believe defy all ages and are very kind of transversal and intergenerational.
In Dubai, by default, we are a transient community. In any given community, over 100 nationalities. Not just the age. Of course, we have older people, we have senior citizens, we have kids, we have toddlers, we have babies in prams. We've got nannies. We've got every demographic you can think about. So, but as Matt says, there are certain things that bring people together. Fun, music, entertainment. We routinely have little rides and slides and all sorts of things, and parents want their kids to enjoy. So regardless of what nationality or religion or where they come from, every parent wants their child to be happy. So when we design our events and we design our community thing, we design with that in mind. There are certain things that are common to most people. We have things like pet days, right? So you bring your furry friends, you bring your pets along, and we have treats. And it just brings people together. And then we have these educational sessions, and we tell them, how you can bake a cake or how you can design cards. All of them essentially want the same thing. They want to be loved. They want to be respected. They want to be heard. They want to become famous. They want the same things. And we've been very, very successful in making people happy in a sense of community.
The demographic really doesn't matter. For us, I think a barbecue, anything that's food related, gets everyone together. It doesn't matter if you're a 21-year-old student, or for some of our properties, we have 60-year-old couples. They always come together. So demographic is definitely not a factor when it comes to bringing community together and to creating events, because there's always something that everyone has a little bit of some interest in that will bring them in there.
So last year, I did a world tour of 100 co-living spaces to understand how to build community. And one question I also had, are co-livers only extroverts, or are they introverts too? And surprisingly, a lot of operators were telling me that the best tenants are introverts. And what people often also don't understand is that being extrovert or introvert has nothing to do with being shy. Right. It's just a matter of how you recharge. And you can be, go into your extroversion mode for 1 hour and then needing 23 hours of recharging, but still be an amazing connector.
Absolutely.
Now, a lot of, Matt mentioned the term rituals, Jeevan, you call it event. A lot of that community building happens through activity. And that's another question I was asked, especially inside of the whole COVID pandemic that is happening, and the inability to host those events and to host those rituals. Do you have a fear that community will diminish? And do you also have a general maybe opinion on what is the future of building communities if events are not possible?
If I can say, my experience has actually been quite the opposite. Okay. Again, as I said earlier, people need people. They need that sense of community. If anything, by staying at home, people are, get fairly depressed. They want to see other people. But a few things that we did really helped us out, because of course, a lot of the seniors could not leave their homes and they weren't able, for example, to go to the shopping market. But we put out, we say, any young person who wants to help a senior citizen, feel free to volunteer. There are a lot of people volunteering. They said, I would do the groceries for you. and they've developed cards and said, if you want me to do the groceries, send me an email. I'll do the groceries. So you just send me a WhatsApp message or send me an email. And they would go and pick up the groceries and they would go to the senior citizens home and leave it at their door. And they actually built a relationship. I mean, much older people with much younger people they've never really met. But a lot of new relationships came about because of this. We've had online sessions, online classes within the community. So they were actually from their own homes, from their own units, they were all connecting together by way of Zoom and Teams and doing some great stuff. So I don't believe that this pandemic in any way diminishes the co-living model.
Rachel, Matt, do you agree to that?
I agree to some extent of it, absolutely. For us, it was incredibly tough to get started doing something online. But of course, we had some of the strictest lockdown rules here in the world, in Singapore, where you couldn't leave your house and you couldn't do anything. But we had to find ways to still ensure people could engage. So instead of us looking at it in a more, grander aspect of our events, we started looking at it in more smaller groups. So we started reaching out to all of the homes that were 5-6 people and coming up with cool ways and working with them for them to reconnect as a household. That now we have some amazing households that have become best friends, and even when they've left, they've said, my best time was being in lockdown with my flatmates. They've rekindled different friendships, they've made different friendships, and they've started up a whole different way of living in their home, and now they don't want to be separated, and they're upset they have to go back to work because they've found the best way to live and work within themselves in this home. So it sucks that we couldn't do the big stuff, but it was great. We could do a lot of small micro parts.
One thing that resonates is really the fact that, I believe any type of situation, especially situations of stress, of crisis, like right now, the pandemic, can bring out the best or the worst in people. Right. And even your example, those young folks taking the time to be there for the older ones because they can't go out, is a showcasing just like the beautiful side of humanity. Now, if you don't create that structure as an operator, as a developer, as a manager, if you don't facilitate those interactions, it can also bring out the worst in people. Right. Matt, you have created with Co-Living Insights the coronavirus blog, which was a bunch of operators showcasing their best practices. Was there something that really stood out to you of what processes were put in place to bring out the best out of people?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of inspiring examples, and I think just going back to your first question, like there was definitely this risk of the quality of events maybe diminishing or having more difficulty of people to connect. But as Jeevan and Rachel shared, I think that in a lot of co-living spaces, there were a lot of innovative ways to connect on maybe more of an authentic way and maybe more intimate gathering. One of the big benefits of co-living is this relationship between the operator and the resident, which is quite close. So I know that operators were very responsive during COVID, and they were able to provide all of the health and safety needs, or many health and safety needs, on the spot and very quickly, which created, I think, a sense of trust and safety from residents towards the operators that enabled them to connect maybe in different ways. And then operators were able to be a bit playful as well and provide different ways to connect, whether it was virtual events or some people were doing like kind of pitch sessions virtually and bringing in people from the outside to train and mentor with their community. Other people were doing actually like little community challenges within the space, and as long as nobody was sick within the space, then they were able to kind of live their life quite normally. And I think that was quite strong.
Leads to another question, which is, what do you see the future of community building, and do you think that generally speaking the demand for community will be increasing? Now, I know that most of you would probably say yes because you believe in it. The real question here is like, why do you think it will be increasing? And why won't people maybe change their behavior because they're scared now of human interactions? Or because of COVID, our culture might be changing to the fact that, people don't hug each other anymore, don't shake hands, and there's more distance. So if you say yes, why would you believe in the fact that there is really hope for more demand for community?
I look at my kids. Okay, so I've got 2 kids. They're adults, and I told them, you got to save money to buy a home. I said, Dad, we are not going to buy a home. Why would we spend money to buy a home? And my daughter told me, she said, I don't want stability, I want relatability. And I said, what does that mean? She says, I want the experience. I don't want to buy a house I rather live in a co-living space. That's my daughter. And then when we went to vacation, family vacation, and we traditionally go to hotels. So why do you go to a hotel? Let's go to an Airbnb. Right? Why buy a car? Let's just take an Uber. So everyone is moving into what we call the sharing economy. It's already there. And so we older people will say, no, 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 I'd rather buy a car. I want to buy a house. I want stability in my life. But in India, they did a survey recently, and 72% of millennials said they wouldn't want to buy a home. They would like to live in a co-living space. This pandemic is not going to last that long. They say it's been difficult, but a lot of lessons have been learned. But I believe that co-living is the future, and this is not going to go away.
Couldn't agree more.
I think one of us touched on it before, is that this pandemic brought out different sides in all of us. And I think a lot of people wish that they weren't living alone during this time because they were incredibly lonely. People have learned the value of having connections and having community and having that network to get them through this, which was far more valuable than living in their own space with their own bathroom and not having to worry about dealing with other people. The only thing I think I'm kind of concerned about for the future of it is that people have now also become heavily reliant on not seeing people, and they have become quite reliant on technology to interact. And I really want in the new year, when I return to work, to focus on getting back to those grassroots and finding ways to connect and bring people back out of that introverted shell, because a lot of people have become quite introverted. I'm also one of them. Now the thought of going out twice in a weekend is too much. And, I think we're going to have to really try and find ways to get back to the grassroots of connecting with people, because I think some people have lost that skill set to interact and connect. And
I always go strong with this crisis of disconnection. The UK has a minister of loneliness. People are disconnected from themselves, from others, and from nature, and something like co-living is an alternative, or it's a solution. It's not the solution, but it is one. Like Rachel was saying, going back to the basics of just communications and learning how to interrelate with one another. It's just bizarre that we have to sort of reteach ourselves to do these kinds of things in these days.
What is the hardest part of community management? Community creation, facilitation, however you want to call that. Jamie asked a question, which was, a lot of members in our community have a lot of lethargy. They seldom leave their rooms to come out for the events. Although they enjoy the events when they attend, how to get people out of their rooms to attend events.
Yeah, for us, this is a huge one. It's incredibly hard to get people out of their room. And especially when, you get to meet them for the first time, you understand a little bit about them, and they're like, oh, I love going bowling, I love rock climbing. We're like, fantastic. Do you know what? That's a great idea. We're going to do that next month. And then they don't show up, and it's not something for them. So it's always a really big struggle to get people to come out and to draw themselves out of their beds. But for me, it always comes back down to really personalizing that approach and picking up the phone and calling people and reminding them of certain things that we're doing, and encouraging them that you're going to be there and that you're going to help them to interact with others, or someone else who's going, so you're like, oh, I know that you're working at this company, someone does something really similar, I think you're going to really get along with this person, and you really should attend. And I do probably harp on about listening and that personal approach, but that's definitely the number one thing for us, is that personalization, knowing our members and reaching out to them on such a regular basis, because that way you get to know them and you understand, how to pull them out of that bedroom.
A paradox that I've seen happen quite a lot is this kind of community versus convenience paradox. There is this expectation that there's a certain level of service that will be provided from the operator themselves, and it creates sometimes a weaker sense of engagement or ownership from residents themselves. So one of the biggest challenges I see in community and co-living is this kind of paradox of, as a commercial third-party operator, how do you foster engagement and ownership?
Again, because of the cultural differences. So there are a lot of things which are, as I mentioned earlier, about kids and having fun, but then you have to also respect people from different cultures, because they have a different understanding of what it means to live in a community. People from India have a different sense of it. People from the Middle East, very different, American and Canadian, and people from the United Kingdom, Australia, they all have their own cultures. And sometimes it's pretty challenging to explain to people that oh, they are doing this because that's part of their culture. It's not a wrong thing in their culture. And so we've got to go and tell people that maybe this is acceptable in your culture, but it's not acceptable in their culture. So you've got to, I won't say behave yourself, but you've got to respect the other person, and you have to appreciate the fact that we're living together as in a community. And so you may not understand that, and you may not like that, but you have to respect that. And so that part is a challenge, but it's also very educational, a part of what we do. Every year in our communities, we had something called Serve the Service Provider. And that one day, residents would work for them. So they would come and serve them food. They would, talk to them. They would give them gifts. And we started this as a very simple exercise, but we realized a lot of residents were coming to us, bringing their kids along. And they said, this is the first time we find that we can serve other people and we can do something for the greater good. And so we found out that when we tell people that here is something beyond yourself, service above self, if you can contribute to the greater good of all the people, it just makes you feel better.
That's beautiful. And that brings back like to one of the first questions. And we discussed this last time internally, like what does community mean? And for you, community is for the greater good.
Exactly.
Which ties back to also bringing the best out of people. And at the end, a community shouldn't be draining. It should be something where you feel obliged to, and like you're investing your energy, it doesn't bring anything back in return. And let's just quickly wrap it up. And if there would be just one sentence, one thing, one highlight that you want to really emphasize on and tell the audience around this whole subject of community, just one sentence, one learning, one key statement you want to make, what is it?
For me, it's contribute for the greater good.
For me, keep on plugging and keep on trying new things, because there's no secret sauce.
If you want a thriving community, then you do need to invest in it and prioritize it as a business.
I'm going to answer the question myself. And for me, it'd be that community is all about alignment. And hence, when you think about building community, you need to remove points of conflict and figure out what is the alignment and needs activities that you can create. Ladies and gentlemen, Rachel, Matt, Jeevan, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, House Monk, for having us. Thank you so much to the audience. I'd say cheers.
Cheers.